welcome to the Imperfect Painter and McCampbell Art Studio. I'm Rachael McCampbell. Today we're going to paint a simple persimmon using both Holbein acrylic and oil paints. I think you'll really enjoy this. It's simple and fun, so paint along with me and always have fun with art. Today I'm using an Ampersand gesso board. It's a cradled panel, 11 by 14 inches. I'm also using some Holbein colored gesso. They're wonderful. They come in these packs already pre-colored for you. I've got a palette knife, a soft brush, a little squeegee, palette paper. I've got paper towels. I've got water. So I'm going to mix up the gesso real good and squeeze it out. I'm mixing raw umber with the green just to tone it back a little bit. I didn't want the green to be super bright. You may ask why I'm gessoing a pre-gessoed panel. Well, the reason is I want to go ahead and tone the panel in a value that is a complementary color to the persimmon, which is going to be green. And to do that, I wanted to either tone it with an acrylic paint, but I have these amazing Holbein colored gessos, so why not use those? So once I mixed this up, I realized it was a little too dark, so I added some more white gesso to it, and that lightened it up. Then I went ahead and covered the panel again with this gesso. I let it dry for a couple of hours. Then I came back and I remembered I had not gessoed the sides. So I gessoed that as well, then covered it with some painter's tape to protect the edges, and then later when I'm done, I'll probably paint the edges black and put it in a float frame. In the meantime, I went ahead and did a little thumbnail sketch with charcoal, just an idea of what I want to do, a persimmon on a table with a vague, landscape in the background. So at this point, everything's been dried several hours, and I'm ready to take a piece of vine charcoal and make a quick little drawing. But first I've got to lay out my acrylics. These are Holbein acrylics. I'm using titanium white, cadmium yellow. I'm going to put out all the colors right here on a list, so there's no need saying it now. I've got a few palette knives of different sizes, and again, the brushes, I will have a list of those names and sizes. They're all Dynasty brushes, except for one. Anyway, they're a variation of flats and rounds and filberts and little ones, so I have a nice choice as I'm painting. So like I said, first I'm going to go ahead and block in my persimmon just lightly with the vine charcoal. I want to get an idea of how it's going to look and what my light source is going to be. Since I'm intending this to be a short painting demonstration, I don't want to get too fussy with the drawing or anything like that. I just want to move quickly through this process. So I'm laying out my acrylics. Whenever I lay out my palette, I like to have a cool and warm tone of every primary color. So today I'm using ultramarine blue and phthalo blue, cadmium red and primary magenta, and I'm using a cadmium yellow, a Mars black, and a titanium white. I normally have a cool yellow, like the Hansa Yellow Light, but I couldn't find it, so this is what I'm using. So the first thing I like to do are mix some grays. So in this case, I'm taking the titanium white, mixing it with a little of the black to create a nice, about a number 4 neutral gray tone. And then the same with the raw umber, just to get a little warmer gray. And that way you can mix it with your colors and it tones them down and pushes back the brightness. I've got a little spritzer that I spritz the palette with just to keep the acrylics from drying. So I'm mixing a little of the reds together and some of the yellow. So it's about a third, a third, a third. I mix all those together, and it's very bright, as you can see. It's really, really, really bright. So I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the gray to tone it back. You can see that immediately grays that red back. Perfect for shadows and areas where you don't want it to be so loud. So I like to hold the color up to the persimmon, look at it, compare. Then while I have a little bit of that red on my palette knife, I mix it with the yellow to make a warm yellow tone. And again, take some of that, mix it with the gray, and get a little bit of a grayed yellow. So I make these piles so that I can have my choice when I start painting and I don't have to be mixing colors the whole time. So with that, I'm making a little bit of a purple, little blue and red together with the phthalo blue. And it's starting to turn almost black, a very reddish brown color there. So I'm adding a little white to the ultramarine for the sky. I find the ultramarine blue with white makes a wonderful sky color for the most part. Seemed a little dark. Don't forget that when you're painting with both acrylics and oils, they do have a tendency to dry a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead and block in my darker tones. So this deep brownish red that I made with the crimson and the blue. So I'm jumping right into shadows and dark sides first. Now this being acrylic, it's drying very fast. And I've sped this up, otherwise this video would take way too long. So, but there is time to blend a little bit for sure. And the Holbein acrylics are very creamy and they stay moist for a good amount of time. So now I'm getting into some lighter tones, and one of the reasons why you tone your panel in some sort of color choice is that you've already got a middle tone in there. You've got a value that is already in the middle of the area, which is that green. So then when I do light lights or dark darks, it really sets off really well against that middle toned area. So I like to be very impressionistic and rough and loose with my work. So as you can see, I'm using this big brush, blocking in quickly, fast, and crudely. I'm not getting fussy. And there are a lot of artists who just stop with that style of being very, very loose and quick with the acrylics and really not worrying about blending colors in or anything, just laying it down and being very almost slapdash, and it's very beautiful that way. It's a very fresh look. I have a tendency to want to go a little more realistic sometimes. So as you can see, I don't clean my brush a lot. Because it's acrylic, I don't want it to dry on my brush, so I'm very cognizant of that. So I clean my brush, but I also will mix colors a lot together. I like them to gray out and just see what happens when you have blue on your brush and you pick up some yellow and you have a greenish tone, and then you add a little red to that and it turns a little brown. So you can just keep muddying yourself a little bit and not worrying about it too much, because you know it's going to be covered up anyway. So there's the loose indication of a sky. I like to add colors all around when I have them on my brush. So I had that blue there, and even though the leaves on the persimmon are not really blue, I like the idea of carrying the blue all through the painting just to create some unity. So while I had the blue on my brush, I thought, don't want to waste it. Let's add it to the yellow and create some greens. Add a little brownish red to that and make a warm olive green. And so once you start playing with colors and really mixing them and seeing what happens when you mix like yellow and black, it makes a beautiful olive green. So you want to learn to just play with colors and not be precious with them. Just see what happens, especially with acrylics, because in 10 minutes they're dry anyway. I'm picking up some red back there because I want to repeat a little bit of the warmth of the persimmon back there in the background as well. Creates a conversation. Since my focal point is the persimmon, I'm not really going to have a lot going on with the background. I want to keep it pretty muted, and at the end I end up muting it even more. So now I'm picking up some pink tones because I want that table to be a bit of a light rustic table. I'm not really sure what the material is, maybe slats of wood. Not realistically colored, however. Gosh, it's so much fun to paint. I just love the surprise of never knowing how colors might appear when you put them next to each other, and it's just always so much fun. So I've repeated that pink in the sky again just to create unity, to pull the foreground and the background together. Now I'm going back to the persimmon, adding some gray tones. It's a grayish blue. So I'm changing brushes to a smaller brush. And I'm looking at my persimmon, picking up some details on these leaves, like getting into that, seeing where the light hits. This takes some study and concentration on this part. So my light source is coming from the left side. So I'm always aware of the shadows and where the light is falling. As far as blending goes, I'm not too worried about all of that because I know I'm going to be using oil later and I'll be doing a lot of blending. I'm still exploring the shapes and shadows, pulling out lights and darks, creating contrast. And with contrast, you can create depth. These little leaves are sort of tricky because they're a little dried, they turn, they have a lot of veins in them, and I'm thinking, how far do I want to go with the detail on this? I want this to be impressionistic, but I also want it to have a touch of realism. I want it to be representational with lights and darks and highlights, but I also want the looseness. So that's just something personal and subjective that you find along your way. So I'm trying to pick out some highlights, areas where I'm seeing the light hit the top of those leaves. And to me, it's a constant dance with addition and subtraction. So I add a dark color, I cover it up. I add a lighter color, I cover that up. It just keeps going back and forth. I need a little more yellow, so I pulled that out. I want to get a little orange salmony color. So when you add these bright cadmium reds, they really pop. So I realized when I got to this part, I was like, whoops, I need a different brush quick. I need to just blend this out a little bit. And I do love texture, so the more layers I add, the more texture I get. The more little bits of the color beneath show through, which is really exciting to me. I also like to move my brush around different directions. I don't know about you, but I think it adds a lot of interest when your brush moves up, down, sideways, you know. Some people have a tendency to move the brush always in the same direction. So using a darker red on that side where there's less light. And I want to repeat those reds in places too. So using the side of my brush, I'm going back in. If there's a little blue on it, that's okay, a little red. I like those little mistakes that happen. So I very much want a muted background, but I'm still following a few laws of that the sun is coming from the left. So I may highlight those banks of trees a tad on one side more than the other. So I'm creating a blue-green with gray mixed in there. And there goes a little bit of a highlight. Adding a little yellow. And as you can see, those greens really pop nicely against the reds in the persimmon. Beautiful to put complementary colors next to each other. So that's a bit of black. I don't always paint with black. You can, but you don't have to. You can just mix your complementary colors together until it looks essentially black. But I was being a little lazy and just decided to set some black out so I could make my gray. Again, I haven't wiped my brush off or anything in a while. I just keep mixing colors on the palette and adding it on there and seeing what happens. By being messy and quick, I can keep a certain looseness. Of course, this is sped up, but it really was fast. So mixing a little ultramarine with a little black and that brown in the shadow. Then I decided I needed something dark over on the left to balance that on the right. And maybe some reddish brown on the table. And then I had this idea, what if there's like a little grass out there? So I thought I'd block that in and see how it looks. I mean, I'm very process oriented and I just like to try things out knowing that I can wipe it off or paint over it. So I knew I didn't want anything that loud, but so you see I mixed that yellow with that black and it goes into that olive green again I was telling you about. I just love yellow and black. So I'm toning that yellow back. Maybe a few tree trunks, I don't know. I may cover those over. Whatever I do, I want it to be just a bit subtle. So I decided it was too much. My focus is on a little persimmon, not the forest behind it. So a little purpley gray like that works wonders in a background. Just pushes everything back. So I'm adding a little more white there. A little ultramarine. And I decided to go lighten up the sky, see how that looks. Definitely brightened it up. I'm using the paper towel to soften the edges there. If only I could move my hand that fast in real life. So again, a little green and black to make yellow and black to make a very olivey green color. So that's where I stopped with the acrylic. Now we're moving on to oil. I'm using the Holbein oils. I've got titanium white, I've got phthalo blue, ultramarine, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow, and some Mars black. I will have this list again below here in the description. So with oils, obviously you don't need quite as much laid out. I've got a small palette knife that I'll probably use the whole time, about the same brushes. I've let the acrylic dry for several hours. Sometimes it's best to let it dry for 2 days. But I put this under a heat lamp, so it really dried quite nicely. So I'm mixing the cadmium and the crimson and the yellows together again with the white again, just like I did on the acrylics, to create a bit of a salmony color. Now I'm taking the ultramarine blue with the red to get a purpley red going for those shadows. And then the phthalo blue with the crimson. Phthalo blue and crimson really makes a nice black, or almost black, a warm black. So I'm taking a bit more crimson to that. A little more blue. You can see it gets pretty black. Then I want to tint that with a little white, so you have a cool whitish grayish color. It's got a purpley tone to it. This is the ultramarine blue with white again, like I did with the acrylics. So I'm mixing that together for the sky. And then a little bit of that cadmium yellow with the ultramarine blue to make a warm olivey green. So when you take a warm yellow and a warm blue, you're going to get a warm green. So now I'm taking a warm yellow with a cool blue, which is the phthalo blue, and so you get a completely different green with that. It's very bright, almost on the blue end of green. And I don't know where I'll use that, but who knows? I like to create my piles. So I'm taking yellow and a little bit of that reddish brown to make almost a bit of a yellow ochre color. I'm going to add a little white to knock that back. So for highlights, that lighter but toned down yellow is really quite nice. Then when you mix yellow with a little purple, like this, it turns a form of green, but a very putty light green. It's one of my favorite colors. So now I'm mixing the green and the red together. I'm mixing the complementary colors together just to create a little darker, warmer green. And I'm thinking about shadows and different colors there, so I'm going for some cool shadows and some warm shadows. Okay. I'm using Gamblin's Gamsol odorless mineral spirits to clean my brushes, and I'm using the Holbein painting oil medium to thin the paints a little bit and to make them a little more liquidy. So I'm starting with a medium-sized filbert here, and since so many of the colors are already there with the acrylic, I'm just lightly adding at first some of the oils. Now you could just glaze over and really thin out the oils with the medium to create, more subtle colors if you want, but at this point I also want to go pretty opaque and add some darker tones that create some brightness, like I just did with that red. And these oils are really, really creamy and just quite luscious. They dry to a beautiful gloss. So as I have a color on my brush, I just like to move all around the painting and see where could I add this color. I hate to waste it. So I realized that red on there was a little too competitive with the persimmon. It just was too loud. So I'm toning it back with some purple, purpley gray. It's lovely to put neutral tones like a purpley gray next to a bright cadmium red. They really pop. And as you can see, I'm just don't want to be very precious with this. I'm really trying to keep this on the looser side. So I get pretty rough with my brushes. I just push them around pretty hard. So I'm wanting to add some darker shadows to create some contrast there. And here I go again with some yellow and some black. I want to get these olive greens in there. So even though there was green on my brush, I just wanted to jump right into the persimmon with a little bit of green on my brush because green and red are complementary colors. So when you add a little green to the red, it just tones that down a bit too. Makes it a little more subtle. I imagine I could have left the trees the way they were in acrylics, but you know, once I start with oil, I want to go over everything with oil. I just want the same kind of texture and surface quality. So I clean off my brushes every now and then, wipe them with a paper towel. Then I go back in with the medium and pick up another color with the oil. I'm pretty much painting this whole painting so far with one brush. I believe that's a number 4 Filbert by Dynasty Black Gold series. So I put on a very bright yellow, which I'm going to have to push back, but I'm just wanting to create a little more contrast with light hitting the trees. So I like to lay down colors, look at them, consider them. Maybe they stay, maybe they don't. You know, one of the best things to do about editing your art is, for this exercise, I don't have time to edit it. I'm going to make some quick decisions, lay everything down. But if I were to turn the painting against the wall and come back in 3 days, I would see so many things to change, which I completely recommend all the time for my students, because it's just a great way to evaluate and see your mistakes. Also, taking a picture of your painting and looking at it on your phone really helps. So it's something about reducing the size. You can really see huge errors that when you're just too close to it, you can't see. I kind of wish I'd left the sky just like that. I like that. But I ended up wiping it out. So now I'm adding a little bit of green to the shadow just to add some contrast with the red and the complementary colors there. Make things pop. But it's a little loud, so I'm going to have to tone that back. So now I'm getting a smaller brush and dabbing a little medium, and I'm going to pick up some highlights on this leaf, but I want it a very pale olive tone. I always find color mixing a little bit hard to verbalize. It's almost something you just have to experience. So to warm that up a little bit, I picked up a little bit of that peach to add to the yellow, so it would do just a little bit of warmth. There are a lot of cool tones in there. You can see the blues and the grays and the purpley gray. So I used to paint in a very, very realistic, tight way. And so to just let some color sit without fussing over it too much is sometimes a challenge for me. It's something I'm growing toward. And there's nothing wrong with realism and very, very, very tight, beautiful realism. It's just not me. And I had to realize that after some amount of time that, you know, it's like anything in life. You get older and you start realizing, I don't want to go to that place, or I don't want to wear those clothes, or I don't want to do that thing, and I don't want to eat those foods. And it's the same with painting. You just realize it just doesn't feel right for my personality. So for my personality, I feel that I need to be more experimentational and just not be so tight with my colors and not be so predictable. So I'm going in with like a deep burgundy color for some shadows. See how that looks? If it doesn't look good, I'll cover it over. You know, one of the greatest gifts about learning to paint is that it increases your ability to observe so much. And once you study a persimmon and really stare at it, you'll never forget it. And every time you look at a piece of fruit, you won't view it the same way. You'll be studying every nuance of color and texture. So now I've pulled out the really skinny brush, and I'm trying to add a few more, I guess, delicate details here. One thing I really like to do with oils is paint and then let the paint set up. So I like to come back in about a day or 2 days even and mess with the oils in a little more stickier situation. But like I said, in this case, this is a one and done situation. I gave myself 2 hours to paint this, and that's that. It's just gonna be what it is. But I'm just saying, if you want to go for a different effect, a little more realism, you could let the paint set up and then go back. You have a little more control over it that way. Right now it has a tendency to get a little muddy. So I've cleaned my brush off. I've added a little more yellow and white to get a very bright yellow for some highlights. I think this is one of the most fun parts of painting, is when you get to come in and add some of the lights. As you can see, I'm being pretty deliberate at this point. I'm trying to get a few more browns in there, like a yellow ochre brown or raw sienna. So I decided a little purple might add something interesting to this. So at this point I'm going back to the big flat brush because I want to make some larger shapes again. I've gotten little small shapes and I want to just kind of pull things out to make some bigger shapes. And I decided that I need to lighten up that table a little bit. But loosely. Sometimes it's fun just to take the back of the brush and just push the paint around, make little marks. Now I went with some of the peach in the background, and I guess I was thinking I might add a warmer sky, but then I ended up changing my mind. So now I went to add a little bit of yellow ochre, touch more medium. I decided that maybe a little yellow on the table against the purple might be nice. I'm taking a dry brush at this point and softening the edges. just to blend them a little bit. So using your paper towels, sometimes nice. It gives a very soft, muted look when you mush things together with a paper towel. So I keep adding more contrast, taking it away, adding more. It's a process. So adding a little bit of that red on top of that green helps mute that shadow. Again, I'm using the back of the brush for a little mark making and unexpected texture. I felt like I'd gotten so muted that I needed to add a little more brightness back in with some reds. So sometimes I use a fan brush just to push things around and soften them. So as you can see, it blends the background a bit more, which pushes it back. I've added a little bit more white so I can get some more of that ultramarine sky. Again, I'm just trying to keep it super loose, light, indicative. So to create a little more contrast, I added that white on there, on the wood, just to have a little more pop, a little more conversation with the sky. So I'm just adding some highlights here at the end. I think I could spend a week on these leaves and never be happy. I just kept wanting to go back to them and back to them and back to them. But I had set the alarm so that I would have to stop myself. So at this point I took an old toothbrush and I dipped it in the Gamsol with the reds and the greens to make a nice brown. Then I basically taken the dirty paper towels and other paper towels and block off an area where I can splatter some paint with the toothbrush. And sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. Dabbing it up a little bit. And then where it got a little messy, I just push it back out with the brush. Sometimes if you press too hard, the paper towel will imprint into the oil itself, which is what happened here. But I did that just to give a little more texture and interest to the wood. Now this time I did it with a brush, and I just hit the brush on the edge of my finger. I did it on the persimmon, but there wasn't much contrast, so you can really see it. It's very subtle. And then I decided to do a little on the background. Too many red dots. Had to wipe them off. And I'm back at those leaves. I just can't control myself. So I decided here to go with a little bluish white for a highlight. I felt like it needed something to stand out. And it does pop. This timer is about to ring, and at that point I stop. I have to. I promised myself. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button below. Tell your friends and tune in for future painting videos. Experiment with your art supplies, play, and remember to always have fun with art. See you next time.